Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Quick reminder, support the broadcast. Best way to do that, become a paid subscriber on the Substack, a little over $9 a month, $9.11 to be precise, or $91.10 annually. And we do private weekly group Zoom chats with paid subscribers only to shoot the breeze. I bring back sometimes past podcast guests to do a live Q&A, and I do a weekly commentary and write-up of the news and the headlines. You can also donate. All the links are on the website, geopoliticsandempire.com. You can also purchase a consult if you want to chat with me. And my sponsor this month is Mikhail Thorpe's Expat Money Summit. It's free. It's online October 7th to the 11th. The link is in the description to register. You can watch the live stream 24 hours for free. After that, you got to upgrade. If you use the promo Empire, you'll get $100 off. I'll be participating in the summit, and it's all about internationalization. Check out my affiliates as well and leave a podcast review if you have not already. Joining us for his maiden voyage on Geopolitics and Empire, we've chatted on TNT Radio previously, Steve Poikonen of AM Wakeup. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Steve.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very stoked to be here.
Yeah, it's you do fantastic work. I've been on your program. You've been on my old TNT show, and maybe to start, we're gonna have a few moments of silence. I'm wearing my TNT Radio t-shirt, because we heard the news today. Apparently, TNT is done. It's finished.
TNT is no more. Yeah, wrapping up, rolling up the rug. Yeah, and I mean, this is something that you see in media ventures all the time. But they put it, especially with your show and Charlie's show and a number of other people, they're really doing some subversive dissident content. And I'm sad to see it go as a network, even though I do feel like they did a handful of my friends not as well as they could have done.
Yeah, I'm a bit bittersweet. I think it was a great run. I'm proud to have been part of it. I feel like they reached, in some ways, the top of the mountain. Like, all the guests that they had were absolute world class. All the people that that you could and would want to get on were on, but it just was not, I guess, feasible. It's really difficult. The market. Maybe we can get into that a bit later when we talk about alternative media. But to start, if you could, when I have a guest on for the first time, I sort of like to get their backstory, and I haven't, we haven't, I think, gotten your backstory as much. But how did you sort of get into doing what you're doing, and going down the rabbit hole and all that?
Yeah, so I was either blessed or cursed at a very, very young age, and had friends that were significantly older than me. I had a half brother that was 11 years older than me. And when I was 11 or 12, and this really is the crux of it. I got invited to a Grateful Dead show in Alpine Valley, Wisconsin when I was 11. We lied to my parents. We said we were going camping for spring break, and technically we were. But I went to a Grateful Dead show. I took acid at 11 years old, and that ruined me for the rest of my life. I was never going to see the world the way that regular people saw the world ever again. When I was 14 years old, I started listening to Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM religiously. When I was, 15, I think, I got a copy of Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. And that was it, man. That was it. That was it. I knew that I was never going to have the type of desk job or whatever life. I knew that I had a very clear picture of what the system was and how it operated. I spent a number of years traveling around the country for various different things, and traveling outside the U.S. whenever I could. I did Renaissance festivals. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but it's a largest organized group of homeless people quote unquote homeless because you don't have a permanent address, and organized because it's focused around a sort of revolving circuit of employment opportunities. I had worked as an under the table carpenter for 25 years, and I've never really, one foot in, one foot out of what I guess traditional or mainstream society was, but I was always way more the 1 foot out than the 1 foot in. I wrote a lot in the early days of internet political reporting. I actually took a paying gig from The Nation magazine to cover the 2008 presidential election. I was summarily fired by The Nation magazine and then blacklisted from all other major publications because in 2008 I wrote an article called Barack Obama, Reagan with a Tan. And they did not like that at all. But according to Obama at the time, that's who he was. That's the candidate that he was billing himself as. So I felt that it was a fair assessment. Higher ups did not. I had some kids, so I stepped away from media for a handful of years. And then about 6 years ago, I realized that there was a giant lane in the media space for people who were nonpartisan, who had a very different outlook on the way that narrative management has been conducted, and significant criticisms of it, but also a way to like make light of it and make it more approachable to people. And so for the last 6 years or so, I've been hosting a handful of different shows, almost all of which are still running, and trying to bring a particular resurgence of what I see as like old school morning radio. I was a huge fan of the Opie and Anthony radio show back in the day. They let people come on. They let them go nuts and be themselves. They didn't get in the way of the guest. And the focus was on the funny. And so that's largely what I've tried to do for the last several years is focus on the funny, find solutions outside of the system, remind people that there are already a ton of folks that are doing the groundwork and doing the hard work of extricating themselves from what is an ever increasingly obvious technocratic surveillance grid and technocratic surveillance state, and try to highlight the ways that we can get out of that. And hopefully, we've had good conversations and a ton of laughs along the way. But that is about as a truncated version as I could possibly produce.
Yeah, and I guess maybe to dig into alt media topic now, since we're a few feet into it, as you say, that was the 2000 teens. A lot of us began listening to the Corbett's in the late 2000s, and a lot of I would look at everything: Global Research, Voltaire Net, LaRouche, Infowars, across the spectrum, completely. And as you say, nonpartisan. Not buying into this sort of left-right paradigm. And I think a lot has changed on the alt media scene. For me, one of the things that I am most interested in is how the security state or the globalists, because as media transforms, the legacy media dies. It becomes obvious. Everyone knows about the Carl Bernstein, I think, Mockingbird, and how the CIA is embedded in the legacy media. And then alternative media comes along, and then they find ways to come in to alternative media. And then in the last, 5 years, alternative media has again transmogrified, right? Transformed. And then they too have to sort of change, but it's kind of really obvious to see them coming from a mile away. And so what are your thoughts on, I guess, the state of alternative media today, and something that you talk about, controlled opportunism? How do you see the environment right now?
Well, There's a couple of dovetailing theories that I've come up with over the years. The very first one I call manufacturing confusion, and it's my contention that and this is totally based off of the you know well, Chomsky gets the credit for manufacturing consent, but that the consent was manufactured in the mainstream media, traditional legacy media, whatever you want to call it, by the time the ink was drying on the Patriot Act. They had already manufactured confusion. Now that's 2003. We're 21 years removed from that. I contend that the primary function of media, legacy, and then now mainstream alternative, is to manufacture confusion, because consent's been manufactured. There's no way we're going to deviate from the permanent war state. There's no way we're going to extricate ourselves from the self-perpetuating money laundering machine unless we have a unified effort to do so. So the main focus of media is now to keep people in a state of confusion. If you're confused, you're malleable. You can be directed in one way or the other, and that one way or the other ultimately always leads you back into the two-party paradigm. The other side to that is that the landscape that we're forced to participate in, more often than not, unless you're a James Corbett or a handful of other people who've had a website up for 20 years or something like that, and you can say, no, I'm not going to play on any of the major platforms. I'm going to rely on RSS and word of mouth and this, that, and the third in order to find my audience, or for my audience to find me. The landscape itself is controlled. So within that landscape, we're on the internet. The internet was made by DARPA. Most of the major streaming platforms that exist because they've had massive initial rounds of funding by people like In-Q-Tel or Peter Thiel or a number of these other elite oligarchs, tech oligarchs, who want to drive a very specific narrative. The landscape is controlled, then the people who get promoted within that landscape, wittingly or unwittingly, are what I refer to loosely as controlled opportunists. I think that there are far too many people in the audience and in the host space that throw around the phrase, the controlled ops. Right. Yeah. This is what, this guy's a controlled op. That guy's a controlled op. Well, I think that if you've already drawn the acceptable lines of conversation, those parameters are recognizable to just about everybody in the space, then you don't need as many people to be quote unquote controlled opposition, because you've welcomed what I refer to as controlled opportunists. People who know just how far they can go, people who may be very self-aware of how to brand, how to market, how to push forth a narrative, and how to get on a hot button issue without ever once making a definitive statement about it or crossing over those lines of, now you're demonetized, now you don't have a YouTube channel, oh, you're yanked from Spotify. And the environment itself has manifested through its own containment a very reliable, very recognizable, and very oxygen-sucking conglomerate of opportunists who don't necessarily believe in any of the things that they're talking about, but do recognize that if they spend time talking about it, they're going to generate clicks, they're going to generate views, and most importantly, they're going to generate revenue for themselves, because we've watched the traditional model of media erode and go to dust like it should, and move over to the digital space. Well, if this is where all of the conversation is being held, why would you not, as as a state, as a Five Eyes conglomerate, as a 37 Eyes conglomerate, why would you not want to control everything that happens on there to the best of your ability. And I do believe that that's the environment that we find ourselves in, with an overwhelming percentage of even alternative media. So yeah, that's the nuts and bolts of it, and we can flesh out whatever you want to.
Yeah, I mean, a handful of people. I bring this up on occasion in passing in some podcast interviews, and some people, like one or two, will get all hyped up in the comments. And recently on my roundtable, I think with Monica and Mike, I brought up Candace Owens and other folks, like throwing everyone under the bus. And I don't know if this person's just a troll or not, but I think one thing is this hero worship, or listeners of podcasts. It's almost like idolatry. They worship a James Corbett or a Candace Owens, and I love the Corbett. We've been on each other's programs, but this is what, maybe if you could speak to this. I think I have a biblical worldview, and for me, it's like I'm no respecter of persons. I respect everyone, but I don't worship anyone. And I think this is one fault I find in people who listen to podcasts is you have to be, gurus. Stay away. Don't let anyone become sort of your guru. Listen to everyone, like this or that person that you listen to, but understand where the boundary is, because when you get too emotional, I think then you start to get taken into some of these deceptions that you've been talking about. No?
Well, yes. And with the advent of, basically peer-to-peer streaming, and the necessity of having some sort of relationship with your audience, what has been created out of that is kind of a de facto relationship that you don't have any control over, because you're not the person consuming the content, you're the person delivering the content. And one of the things that all of us have heard over the years is that people really feel like they know you when they've watched you for years and years, and they've absorbed your viewpoints and your worldview, and wherever that meshes with theirs, that forms an immediate connection. Most people also have been deprived of individual connections in real life, certainly in the last 4 years, largely because of the lockdowns and all of that kind of other nonsense. And so people have developed a very real, very visceral attachment to their favorite show hosts, podcasters, and stuff like that. So they feel a kind of not only ownership, but entitlement to say what they got to say to you, and, treat you however they feel like they need to treat you in any given situation. And it's a very odd give and take relationship with the audience, especially when you're doing it the way that I do, which is value for value, as opposed to taking, doing ad reads or having advertisers or sponsors. The show is entirely driven by the people that watch it. So the people that watch it do feel an ownership of the show, but I've tried to make it perfectly clear that doesn't equate ownership of me. You know what I mean? And I'm not like, I'm never going to do content just because you say so. I'm always going to do, the whole reason you got on board with the show is because you liked the way that, we broke down this, or we broke down that, or, we put out these particular ideas or showcase these people. And so, no, you don't own me, but people wind up feeling that way because they've been so disconnected in real life. They've been so disconnected from interpersonal relationships and discouraged from having them. So we're in a very, very weird new frontier with this kind of thing. And I get it and I sympathize with it, but at the same time, I also won't conform or go along with it, because it's not what we do, and it's never been what we do. And I'm not going to change now just because you decided to donate to the show one day.
Yeah, I've had that experience like one or two times where I had one of my paid subscribers try to bully me, act aggressively, and beat me over the head with their monthly subscription. I value for me it's life and death, every monthly or annual subscription, but if you're going to behave like that, you don't own me. You can't run over me and threaten to. If you're that kind of person, just unsubscribe. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And I've had, in the past year, one or two people like that. But then I do want to ask you, because you talk about the controlled opportunism, and I think it's a mix. There's a lot of people who understand where they can't go further, or they're going to lose their status and the money that they get in alt media. But I'm interested in, there's a lot of strange connections. Mainstream alternative media, other people have, David Icke and others have fleshed that out. A lot of interests, and for me, it's interesting where the interests of the security state, the globalists overlap, and us podcasters or mainstream alternative media. And just the other day, and someone got irked, but I'm not going to not say this. Like I saw on some Twitter thread, Ryan Dawson, they said that he was getting money from Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate, I'm not a fan of at all. The values that he puts out. Again, his father was CIA. Candace Owens. I read the story that she married some dude, and like after 2 weeks, some British royalty, and then she met Tate before that. And I'm noticing these connections, and these are just raising big red flags. And then there are many other in alternative media strange connections. And so, any thoughts on? Are if any that you specifically came across that just blew your mind? Because I think this is we can talk about Jordan Peterson, and the ARC project seems to be again, it's just the WEF sort of a rebranded version of World Economic Forum. And so your thoughts on some of these strange connections?
Well, there's an obvious cross promotional network, and I think especially with the Tenet Media DOJ indictment, it gives people who are willing to look at it the opportunity to realize that there's no such thing as organic explosion into the media space. It is a controlled environment. We're talking about YouTube, which has the parent company Alphabet, which is without question an extension of the government. We're talking about Rumble, which is, whatever you want to think about the original founder. Over the last several years, there's been massive cash infusions from Donald Trump Jr., Peter Thiel, Vivek Ramaswamy, and a number of other people who are legitimate policy influencers that effectively control now what has become the default to YouTube. So you've got Eric Schmidt and Alphabet, Susan Wojcicki, and ultimately the deep state on YouTube. And then on the other hand, with Rumble, you've got Peter Thiel, Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump Jr., and a number of other people who are the other side of the deep state coin in terms of influence and influence peddling. It is completely a controlled environment. I would be highly, highly suspect of anyone that has a long-term contract with either of these corporations, because that's what they are. They're multi-billion-dollar media corporations that are paying out tons of money to have specific people on to deliver specific narratives. The same goes with their advertisers and sponsors. The model that made every single one of us go, I'm turning my back on mainstream media. I'm never going to listen to these guys ever again, unless it's to make fun of them or to point out the glaring hypocrisies and contradictions and things that we generally tend to do, exists in what David Icke has called the mainstream alternative media, or Dr. Shiva calls the not so obvious establishment. There's an event coming up called Rescue or Restore the Republic or something like that, and it's literally every limited hangout influencer on Rumble that you could ever possibly imagine. And people are failing to recognize this, because what the viewing audience has been starved of forever until the last 8 years or so has been authenticity. And if you can be a handful of degrees more authentic than Don Lemon or Anderson Cooper or whatever, you're viewed as legitimate. And the whole reason that I came up with the controlled opportunist thing, and it's getting fleshed out into a book, is because I wanted to be a field guide for people to navigate independent and alternative media. The landscape itself is controlled. So all of the different, all of the different things that you see in that landscape are going to be placed there. They're placed there for a reason, and the reason that they're placed there is because you need to get 80 to 90% of the truth from a mostly authentic source in order to engage. If you're engaged, that's where your time, your effort, your energy, and your resources are going. They're not going to doing things like making sure you're growing your own food, or educating your children, or, trying to create a space within your community that is defensible from an ever encroaching tyrannical state. And that's what people have broadly referred to as limited hangouts. And that's the environment that we're playing in. And I can't think of a cast of characters more to highlight what that is than the whole Rescue the Republic thing. You've got everyone from Russell Brand to Spook Malone to Brett Weinstein and everyone else under the sun that has been doing partisan-based media from a quote-unquote authentic or outsider perspective. But at the end of it, they're all telling you, hey, if you just take part in a system that is designed to never represent you, eventually it's going to represent you. The way that I put voting and participating in politics in general is that if you had a machine, right, and that machine was built and designed to only work for 1 out of every 1 million people, and for the all other 999,999, it would kill you. And sometimes it would kill you immediately. Sometimes it would kill you slowly, but it would only work for 1 out of a million, and everybody else is dead. You would probably go, we need to design a new machine. Only in politics do you go, hey, if we put a couple of shiny new parts on this machine every 2 to 4 years, it's going to work for us. And that's only prolonging the life of a machine designed to kill you. And yet, everybody involved in this is telling you, let's put a couple of new parts on the machine. Sometimes it's let's buff off or shine up some of the old parts because they just need another chance in order to make sure that this machine perpetuates.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about limited hangouts, having been on TNT and the podcast interviewing so many people, some of the things that stand out to me is like how many books, I get pitched by publishers to talk about, yet another person's written the 10th book on woke, cultural Marxism and communism taking over America. And I'm just like, really, I feel like it's a psyop at this point. I almost feel like it's a diversion because no one, I've had on David Hughes or, Patrick Wood, and it's like when you're at the surface level, when you're talking about this communism or Marxism, it's like none of these people are talking about technocracy or algocracy or the algorithm ghetto or how, like Michael Rectenwald, who I've talked to, it's an amalgamation of, yes, it's socialism, it's communism, it's fascism, it's technocracy, it's algocracy. And it's like that keeps us, is that limited hangout. It prevents us from going even deeper into understanding what's really going on. And everyone's just getting hung up on all this woke stuff, which just seems like a diversion. And, I was trying to listen the other day. Well, I usually, when I make food, I'm listening to podcasts on double speed. I try triple speed, Rogan and Brett Weinstein. And I literally listened to the first hour. Like literally, I learned nothing. I think I lost some IQ points. Rogan again was talking about aliens and UFOs to Brett Weinstein, who doesn't know anything about that stuff. And he's like, what am I getting here? And then, I saw that clip later on about Weinstein talking about COVID. And it's just like, a lot of us knew this 4+ years ago. Like, what am I learning? I'm not learning anything from this guy. And it's interesting when you mentioned the growth in alternative media. If you're like a pro NATO account, you'll get blown up on YouTube, X, and everything. Or I've noticed this as well. If you're like a hyper pro BRICS, pro Russia, pro multipolarity account, you'll also get blown up. But if you're in the middle, and you reject both those paradigms, you don't get really blown up, as far as I can tell. And this whole DOJ thing with Tenet Media, to get your further thought, because back in July, I was kind of making a ruckus on my podcast saying, hey guys, this anonymous website just did a write-up on me, calling me a Russian agent, specifically my name, my website, putting up pictures of me shaking hands with Gorbachev. And yeah, I've got a Vladimir Putin mug I picked up in St. Petersburg when I visited in 2017. And the previous year, they tried to make me out, some strange website tried to make me out to be a neo-Nazi, but I'm a Slavic Mexican, so that's double plus Untermenschen, so that they couldn't get the Nazi thing to stick. My grandpa was a prisoner of the Nazis, so and now it's like they go to, okay, we can't get him with that, go back to Russian agent. And then as things progress, last month New York Times put out an article, and now the Tenet Media DOJ thing, and so it kind of freaks me out because have you ever thought soon the work that you do, that I do, we might actually end up, having feds knock on our doors or fine us and put us in jail? Because ultimately, I think this was just probably an inside job. The whole Tenet Media thing, it was the American deep state inventing this sort of story. Maybe they were the ones funneling money or something to basically. It's an attack on free speech in America, because the goal here is basically to shut down dissent in America, and ultimately this is what the whole Tenet Media thing does.
Well, you're correct, and there's a handful of divergent goals that come into play, or convergent goals that come into play. One is it's election season, and for over a year now, we've been saying that the establishment wants to make America 2016 again. And they want everybody in that exact same mindset, where Russia's the bad guy, where a mean old Donald Trump is running against a unlikable pantsuited war criminal, where Jon Stewart's back on the air, where everybody is in the exact same malleable mindset. And I think they've done a fairly good job of that. But we have to remember, even with a whole $10 million thrown to Tenet Media, $10 million, which a tenth of that would make our shows survive for a year, if not a year and a half or 2 years. It'd pay our bills for a while. It really would. A tenth of that. And nobody's throwing that money at us. $10 million compared to the administration paying out well over $1 billion to various different influencers throughout the COVID whole deal, throughout leading up from COVID to the DNC just a month ago, where the Harris administration now was saying, hey, if you're a social media influencer, we'll fly you out to Chicago, we'll put you up in a hotel, we'll give you a stipend, all you have to do is do positive content for us, and that'll be fine. If you took that $10 million and you stacked it up against that, it wouldn't even be a drop in a bucket. To say nothing of the fact that in 2012, Barack Obama signed into law the Smith Modernization Act, which allowed for unfettered state propaganda to be pushed on the airwaves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without ever disclosing that what they were doing was state propaganda. I don't know how you can look at any sort of quote unquote influence campaign and not weigh it against what already currently exists in the United States as far as what the state is allowed to do to propagandize, let alone what they're allowed to do with money that they steal from us and then turn around and dish out to other people in order to go do their work for them. It's a very weird situation to be in. You and I were talking before we got rolling here, but I go on Radio Sputnik every week, and I have for 4 years. They don't tell me what to say. I do get articles, hey, here's the 3 things we're going to be talking about during your segment. and I change nothing about what I would do on my show on Rockfin or BitChute or Odyssey or Rumble. The only thing I change is that I don't say swear words and I keep it radio friendly. Nobody has ever told me what to say. Nobody has ever told me what opinion I'm supposed to have. I am legitimately surprised that as an outspoken, agorist, anarchist, I'm allowed on that network. I really am. I listen to a lot of the content on there. I'm an outlier as far as my opinions go. They really do have a lot of, America hating lefties on Radio Sputnik. They're supposed to. It's an oppositional outlet. To bring on people like, Brett Baer or somebody like that would be ridiculous and nobody would listen. So adversarial media needs to exist. You have to have those viewpoints brought out into the public square in order for people to begin to formulate a more complete opinion. What I try to do is broaden the lens in which people are looking at these things. And I may be subjected, just as you may be, just as most of our colleagues who are in the true independent media may be subject to some sort of additional scrutiny, harassment, eventual investigation because of it. Of course, I wake up every day thinking about that. And how could you not?
I'm down here in Mexico, so they'd have to extradite me, but also being a Mexican citizen, I wonder how if I can get my Mexican government to not extradite me, but and the double standards as well. This whole everyone's financing all sorts of propaganda, all countries in the world, and so America finances so much propaganda against other countries, and so if I don't even buy the whole DOJ tenant media RT thing, but even if I did, NATO, State Department, USAID, we're funding abroad. We're doing the exact same thing. So it's just like the horror, like we can do it, but they can't, or Israeli influence on media in America, or the Chinese. It's just like, why are we just focusing on the Russian? And so. And before moving on to other topics, just to get your thought on the difficulty, sometimes people who listen, they'll ask me tips on if they want to throw their hat in the alternative media ring, and we saw what happened with TNT Radio. I know Jason Burmos was on Red Voice Media previously. They didn't have money, so they had to cut him from Red Voice Media, and so it's a really tough space to be in financially. My story was I worked as a professional and I just started the podcast as a hobby. It's just a hobby, moonlighting for a decade. And then finally, after a decade, you build up a certain archive and followership. Like, it's a long road, really. And then finally now I'm somewhat able to survive. It's still not given. There are times where I think maybe I'll just have to throw in the towel and go back to being a professional, working 9 to 5. But just any thoughts, again, back on TNT Radio, how it's difficult for something like that to get off the ground, and if people want to get into space,
I mean, if you want to start a podcast, go start a podcast. Do that today. The best time to start one was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Second best time to start one is right now. If you want to start a network, that's an entirely different story. And the cost of server space to maintain your archive is astronomical, especially if you're doing video and things like that. It costs a ton of money if you're going to try and network or build a network like that. So I get why these particular outlets come and go, because their day-to-day operations are through the freaking roof. It's very difficult to sustain anything remotely resembling a network, and so if you don't have either the viewership or the support from the viewership, you're dead in the water. And I mean, you and I both know it really is like basically a month-to-month thing. And if you get in a position where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm good for 3 months, It feels like Christmas. It really does. But then you're only good for those 3 months. The thing that people don't really understand about what we do, and I've been doing a live morning show for about 3 years now in a couple of different formats. Your best show that you've ever done, nobody gives a crap when they wake up the next day and you go live again. You either you succeed or fail day to day. It's not an across the board thing. It's not 1 week I had a really good lineup of guests and that's going to sustain me. No, it's not. Life doesn't work like that. Bills don't work like that. Random vehicle mishaps or injured children don't work like that. So you have to constantly be aware of the fact that it could all go away at any moment, and you have to not care. You really have to not care about that. You have to put it all out every single day. They can't all be zingers. You're going to have shows that suck. You're going to have shows that are going to be way better. And you're going to have shows that ride somewhere in the middle that are hopefully enough to maintain the audience that you build over the years. But it is, in all reality, you're putting yourself out there, basically naked in front of the world every single day and daring them to hop on board and go along whatever ride you're presenting. And we really are working without a net here, man. It's a crazy way to live. I think that there's only a handful of people in the legitimate alternative media for that reason, because it's so hit and miss, and there are no guarantees at all. You could fail just as easily as you could blow up. And again, the controlled environment that we operate in is designed to make sure that you and I don't blow up.
Yeah, I still look back. My biggest interview with Francis Boyle, 300,000 plus views, seen by millions in reposts. If that had been allowed, I would have skyrocketed. But it's like every time they keep you in your cage. And what you just said, I think you nailed it. I'm just popping stuff out. Take it or leave it. My attitude is, sometimes people will say, I recently interviewed Andrei Marchanov, Russian American, who's, pro-Russian perspective. I interviewed someone who was not pro-Russian. And I had a few people say, I'm unsubscribing. And it's just like, good. I don't have time. I don't have time for your, the hissy fits. Unsubscribe. Yeah. I'm on to my next podcast tomorrow, and the next one, and the next one. And as you say, they're not everyone can be a zinger, and we just got to keep moving on. And I often think, a 1 or 2 man operation is probably the best when it comes to podcasting. Like Corbett has Brock, and so there it's basically a 2-man operation there. And financially, it's got the least amount of overhead. And so I'm just one person. I'm doing everything. And I was shocked to learn Anomaly, who makes, I think, a bunch of money. He did a video a few months back saying that he does everything mostly himself, which is kind of impressive. What about the IND Media Alliance? So that's something we'll be talking about in the coming days. And so any thoughts here on this sort of development?
I've been preaching community building and, organizing within the space the entire time that I've been here. I think that something like this really is long overdue. And the things that made it attractive to me is that there's no financial backing. There's no financial incentive. All of the content is being put out for free. People who recognize, a handful of the names that are a part of it have gone out of their way to approach, Derek or Ryan or who, and say, hey, we would like to provide some services to help make sure that you guys can proliferate this content. And there is always strength in numbers. We at least on Slow News Day and AM Wake Up, we've been talking about the importance of establishing a community and making sure that that community is as technocratic, state proof as you could possibly make it. And that's the only way we're going to get out of this. And then to network with other people who are doing the same thing. You don't have to agree on everything. You don't have to be in lockstep. You just have to recognize that the world operates in a completely different way than the way that we were marketed, and want to seek solutions that are outside of that sphere. And so that mostly, to the best of my determination, is what everybody that's I've seen come into the alliance like that, that's what they think, and that's what they live. Everybody is actually already doing the work in their own ways to do that in their own personal lives. So I am, in that sense, very, very encouraged and very, very proud to have been invited to something like that. These are, either personal friends of mine or people whose work I've respected. It's, effectively the entire guest list of my show for the last several years, all people that we've had really productive conversations with. And if there aren't people doing this, everybody individually has stuck their neck out for years. And most of us have got it stomped on a couple of good times. So to have people with you in kind of a concerted effort towards a team goal, it's wholly positive.
Yeah, my approach has always been, I try to work, I always have the win-win mentality. I'll go on your show, you go on mine, I'll go on anyone's, whether, you're a tiny podcast or a big one. We should all just sort of be organically networking, putting egos aside. And I guess we'll see what happens with the Indie Media Alliance. I'm part of it as well, Jason Burmis and a few others. So that stuff will be, in the coming weeks. People will find out more. I do have to ask you. So before finally getting to the geopolitical, just one last question on the media. I almost fell off my chair a few weeks back with the whole independent media review, wrestling, lucha libre virtual thing that you guys did. You and number 6 from the New Prisoners did the commentary, and I even know what this came out of left field from. Like, what is this? Who put this together? And it was this half hour virtual wrestling thing, and you had David Icke and Julian Assange and Burmas and Bros, Richard Grove, myself, Scott Armstrong. I can't remember everyone. Charlie Robinson, and I won. I won. I defeated everyone. And what was that all about? And like, did the AI sort of fight itself and then randomly determine the winner, or did you guys make me the winner? How did that work?
Okay, so 6 and a gentleman named Ryan Graham, who curates the show that runs Friday on AM Wakeup, Rockfin, the AM Wakeup channels. Ryan Graham also owns and operates Big Frog Clothing. That's where this comes from, and this comes from, and all of my merch comes from. 6 and Ryan have very solid, like, wrestling fan backgrounds. I'm way more of a UFC guy, but I did grow up in the 80s. I grew up with, WWF being permeated through. I grew up in the Midwest. You couldn't not watch wrestling on Saturday. It happened. It came to the TV like freaking detergent samples showed up in your mailbox. So as a pop culture phenomena, we're all, more or less fans, 6 more so than everybody else. But one day it got cooked up. Hey, let's do, because now you can create characters and plug them into a WWE match and just have them fight. And I honestly don't know if you, as the programmer, get to pick who wins, or if it randomly decides who wins. I have no idea. I'm not on that end. I'm only on the commentary end. But they hit me up. They were like, "Hey, would you do commentary for this?" I said, "Heck yeah." So there are On the Independent Review Alliance YouTube channel, there are dozens of not just independent media people, but war criminals versus technocrats. There's a 4x4 match with the Union of the Unwanted hosts, with Midnight Mike and Charlie and Sam and Ricky versus schmucks, basically, but like other corporate media hacks or war criminals, stuff like that. There's a whole series of like Mothman versus Bigfoot and that kind of thing. Whitney Webb fights Victoria Newland in the ring on one of these. It is phenomenal. And what the concept was, this is the battle for the future. So there's, UN Agenda 2030 branding over all of it and a lot of eat the bug stuff and things like that. But ultimately, it's whittling down various technocrats, war criminals, members of the mainstream media or mainstream alternative media, and then people in the independent media that are squaring off against each other in the battle of the future. An entire season of wrestling storyline put into, I think, 6 or 7 months. We've done like one a month, something like that, where we do actual commentary on, and it's just for kicks. It really is. It's a labor of love, and Ryan Graham does 95% of the lifting on it, and then Six and I come in once a month. We do commentary over it. It's always cold. We have no idea what's happening. We get a list of who's coming in and then who gets eliminated about 10 minutes before we do the recording. It's one take only. That's all, and then that's what you get in the matches. It's been so much fun, man. It is. And I do UFC commentary pretty much every month too. So it's a nice departure from that, where you can be as absolutely, unconstrained by reality as possible. And yeah, dude, very happy. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but you are, if you're listening to Geopolitics and Empire, if you're watching it, you are watching the current reigning champion of the entire independent media in Hervoy Morik right now. He's stomped out absolutely everyone and is about to face the war criminals and the technocrats and the mainstream alternative media in the final battle for the future Royal Rumble. We're going to be recording that next week.
I think it's cool to create this culture that, we can sort of create our own culture in alternative media space with things like this, entertainment. We've got the musicians, the 5 Times August, the Defiance, and all those, and we need stuff like this. And it was just, it's so much fun. And the wardrobe, like, I couldn't believe, and Ryan did that inadvertently, but if you watch the video, that wardrobe, I literally have that. I would teach my classes like that in Mexico, where I had those like gray suit pants and brown dress shoes and white dress shirt. That like, I don't know how he did that. I don't know. That was literally me. My wife looked at it and she's like you would literally, that's what you wore when you taught. And it's just amazing that. And when you saw Charlie Robinson and most except for James Corbett, he came out, I think, black.
He came out almost black. Yeah. He was a little darker than the.
But otherwise, really spot on. So all right, to get a little more serious, we did about an hour now looking at alt media, but what's happening in the world? What's of most concern to you? For me, it's always been this world state, this totalitarian world state that they're bringing in, and the algorithm ghetto, right? This digital control grid. It's operating now in every single nation. So it's basically this global tyranny for me is it. And then you've got plus, the geopolitical aspects, the wars. It does seem like they're going to take us to World War III. Every day I got a message this morning from a past podcast guest, and it might not happen. It might be hype, but they write in. They said, I'm trying to pull it up now. They write me, you heard it here first. U.S. intelligence now assesses the following as, quote, likely. Russia will destroy Kiev and Lviv once Ukraine launches NATO missiles deep inside Russia. China will invade Taiwan using the Ukraine war as cover. Iran will strike Israel. North Korea will launch an offensive against South Korea at that time. And all these things will happen at once. And I honestly see that as a plausible scenario. So maybe not, but sort of what are you looking at with what's happening in the world?
Well, that's all self-fulfilling prophecy. It is. It's all, that's if you want to create a new world order, or if you want to create a one world government, you've got to erase a substantial amount of existing governments, and you've got to reform a substantial amount of existing nation states. There are varying ways that's been playing out. If you look at the EU right now, with all of the ridiculous laws that they passed in terms of who can say what, when, and how protest works, how agriculture works, how surveillance works, how speech works. And that applies across the board in the West, at least universally. This has all been shaping up to reach this very obvious conclusion. Whether or not that results in a hot war, I'm not 100% on that. I think you could wag the dog or make create the illusion of war over about 75% of that without having to fire a single shot. But the technocracy is being promised to us, especially when you look at the American elections, where you've got the PayPal mafia in Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and David Sachs exclusively backing and funding one particular political party. Right now it's the Republicans. You got Elon Musk giving Trump $40 million a month, and then his PayPal mafia partner Peter Thiel being the reason that JD Vance exists in the political arena in the first place. There's that. On the flip side, you've got Eric Schmidt and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates that are all in the tank for Kamala Harris, and they're funding her campaign along with the rest of Big Pharma. And then Big Tech has distributed money throughout both of them. What they're promising you is the infrastructure for the digital prison grid. I don't know if you've ever seen that time lapse. David Icke tweeted it out the other day too, of Starlink satellites over the last, I think, 7 years, and how many have come up and what it looks like right now. And what it looks like is every little weld point on your jail cell bars. It's what it looks like to me, at any rate. So yes, the increasing emergence of the technocratic state is always at the forefront of my concerns, and that's all encompassing. We have to do this stuff online because that's the era that we live in, and that's the medium that you're best able to get your point across. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't, as soon as the cameras are off, go check out our, or tend to our gardens, or go make connections with local ranchers and food producers, do things like, have community meetings where we're talking to our neighbors about this. I've said for years, the best advice I could ever give anybody is grow food and make bullets. And outside of that, love your family and try to have as righteous of an existence as you possibly can. There's a lot of different ways that people do that, and a handful of different spiritualities that people subscribe to in order for that. It's not my job to say which one's best, but I've got my own personal opinions. But we look to the WEF as the boogeyman, I guess. A lot of people do. And they're just middle management, as far as I'm concerned. We do have a lot of people who have done extensive work on a handful of bloodline families that have existed for centuries that pull strings. This doesn't have. It's going to be billed as BRICS versus West, but it doesn't have anything to do with that. That's just a couple of steps back from left, right, or capitalism, Marxism, or whatever. It's still a duality, and it's still a duopoly. And I think the sooner that people realize that they're being played on every aspect of that game, the more we're going to be able to come together to find solutions on the ground, because we really do make this whole thing run. They call us human capital. If they're going to refer to us as human capital, then we're the mechanism by which all of this operates. We have the opportunity to opt out. Right now, we do. We're not chipped yet. We don't have to give up our retina in order to get on the X Everything app so that we can check our social credit score to see if we can order groceries that day. We're not there yet. We're still in this buffer period. And I think that's why we get so much counter reinforcing propaganda thrown at us. I think that's why we get hit with psyop after psyop, and to where it becomes like a multi-tiered wedding cake or onion of psyops, where you get through one and then there's dozens more beneath it, because we're the only people that can make their technocratic state possible. And the only way that we make it possible is if we go along with it. We don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be this way. We can opt out. We can come together. We can work together, even if we don't think the same. And we're constantly told if somebody varies in opinion from you by a degree, they're a de facto enemy. I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I just see, I'm just freaked out. Like, we're really going down the far road on this technocracy. I mean, the EU. Now, if I want to go to the EU, I guess the entry exit system is going live. And so, for my kid, for the rest of them, I can just come and go being a European citizen. But now for my family, I have to fill out a form for each, like a social credit form for each one, wait to be approved. I'm like, what? When I was a kid, I just pay the ticket and I'm in Rome, I'm wherever. And now it's just like, I've been thinking about this the last few days. Like, I can't believe it. Like, I can't believe we've gotten to this point where it's unbelievable, this level of control. Like, now I have to fill out forms to go back home to Europe, and then the Mexican government here. I have to renew my kid's passport. I went to their website. I had an account, and now it says your account is banned. They don't accept Start Mail. I can't use my Start Mail, so I have to use I'm forced to use a Gmail account. It's so Kafkaesque. I log in. My kid can't create an account, and there's no option for me to create an account for her. It's like, how do I renew her passport? I got to call them up now. The old-fashioned way. How long is that option going to be around? And I've been mentioning just in the past weeks in open mainstream Mexican news now, they're rolling out 15-minute cities. Like, they're openly saying Mexico City is going to be divided into multiple 15-minute cities. Other mayors of other towns are now saying 15-minute cities. It's like, it's accelerating, Steve. It's crazy. And what you mentioned about BRICS, it's going to be the same model everywhere. It's the same model in China. They're deploying there's nowhere there is. It's not going to be digital IDs, digital currencies. Russia is just every week legalizing all this stuff, and I guess we'll be talking about that more with the Independent Media Alliance. But any further final thought on how far? I think it's going to be like the dystopia movies. I literally think it's going to be some version of Hunger Games or Maze Runner, and it's going to be global. I mean, BRICS. For the millionth time, I have guests on that believe in the whole BRICS mythology, but it's like, guys, like, I don't but they're okay with the social credit system. Some of these people, their status, I guess that's the difference between them and us, where they kind of believe in some states are more equal than others.
Yeah. And that's at the end of the day, that's just not realistic. And I mean, I have people on the show and people in my life that are so caught up in being aware of just how blatantly evil the elements within the U.S. government have been historically, that it's easy for them to get pulled into siding for whatever team seems to be guaranteeing the demise of the West. And so they're going to cheerlead for those guys because they hate these guys so much. And you don't play for that team. You don't play for either of those teams. You're the ball that those teams kick around in order to score points. And I think that if more people realized that you're the actual ball and not anybody on those teams, the sooner they would come around to our way of seeing things. It's a very wild position to be in, to be not necessarily neutral, but effectively like a Carlin-esque outside observer. George Carlin has this great conversation with Tavis Smalley years ago, and he's like, I figured out a long time ago that I don't fit in to any of this stuff. So because I don't fit in and I recognize that and I'm never going to try, I get to step back and look at it a little bit and take it in a little bit more, I guess, objectively than the people who have bought into the nonsense. Where it's concerning, and nobody wants to have to, fill out a whole bunch of bureaucratic forms just so they can go back home. That's ridiculous. It is on its face. It's the reality that's being pushed on us, but I maintain that it doesn't have to be this way. And there's a couple of different things that we can do about that. Counter economics, certainly right at the top of the list. And I'm not going to sit here and advocate cryptocurrency or anything like that. It's not, I don't, I think that you should have as many available tools in your tool belt and in the back of your truck as humanly possible, because you never know what you're going to need on a job site on any given day. So in that aspect, cryptocurrency is one of those things, but so is everything else under the sun, and they carry equal weight until you need to use one more than the other. I think that Václav Havel's Power of the Powerless is one of the most timeless documents that we could look to in terms of inspiration. And I think that the Velvet Revolution and the way that was carried out in terms of parallel systems and a parallel economy is one of the things that we can look at historically as something that worked, and we can stand on for a base, modified and updated to the landscape that we're currently in. It's a really multifaceted problem, but has a very, very, very simple starting point. And that is, no matter what state, no matter what nation state, no matter what government you are currently living under, their main goal is to keep you ignorant and compliant. And you get to resist that right now. People still have the opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to buy your propaganda. I still have other places I can go to consume information. Texas Slim from the Beef Initiative, who's on AM Wakeup very regularly, talks extensively about we need to change our consumption model. And that applies across the board. You change the way you consume your food. You change the way you consume your information. You can't change the way you consume your entertainment. And you are going to be vastly better off than the majority of people that are caught up in the nonsense. And I think as that proliferates, we have a substantially greater chance to do the things that we've been talking about doing, which is networking up and extricating ourselves from this oncoming technocratic hellhole.
I like what you said about George Carlin being an outside observer. And I feel like that's part of my job with the podcast. I'm just sort of like a chronicler, and I'm just the outside observer of everything that's going on. And what you mentioned as well, in recent days, another example came to mind of when you look at guerrilla warfare. I'm an anti-communist, but when you look, I like using that symbolism, in history of the guerrillas, and they'll use whatever they can get. It's decentralized warfare, information warfare. If they find an AK-47 lying around, they're going to take it. If they find an American weapon, they're going to take it. Yeah, whatever you can get your hands on. And like you said, I'm not a fan of Bitcoin or crypto. I actually think it's the elites who created it themselves as the first iteration towards CBDCs. But it's a guerrilla war, and so I'll use Bitcoin, I'll use crypto. And there's been a few people who've argued against this. No, you can't, because you're going to be pushing us into the technocracy. Well, I'm using their fiat money. I'm using most of the stuff in my home comes from these big corporations. So I basically, if using that logic, I have to go live in a shed, and I can't even go use the hammer from Home Depot. BlackRock is probably invested in Home Depot, so I can't buy a hammer. I got to make my own hammer, because it's BlackRock's hammer. So that argument for me doesn't fly. And I've actually I've been thinking of opening up the subscription on my Twitter account to get donations there, because again, my line, of course, is what. If it's any physical implant, but that I have to take, or, when people talk about the mark of the beast, the bending of your will, for me, that's the most important thing, where it's going to be like, I can have my Twitter, subscription on, people can donate there. But if the system tells me, look, if you say this or do that, we're going to shut your account. That's the moment where I'm going to say no. I'm going to, like what happened to me with Patreon 3 years ago, where they said delete these 2 interviews from the entire internet, or so you can have your Patreon account. For me, that's where it's at. So for me, like, I think it's okay to have your subscriptions turned on Twitter, but when Patreon gave me that option, I'm like, I gleefully said, terminate my account. I'm not going to delete these interviews from the entire space. And so
I've always maintained, and I've said for years, I have been kicked out of better bars by bigger bouncers. I am not scared of you. I'm not. I'm just not. I'm not going to be.
And thoughts then, bringing back to America, the next few months are going to be insane. I don't know. No, you and Wheezy did a great same day on the Trump attempted assassination. I think we have the same view, that I just don't buy it. Just real quick on that, how your thinking has evolved there.
It's only everything that I've seen has just helped reinforce the original take that I had in real time. We've got 2 Miracle Ear candidates for president. We've got Miracle Ear Don, who just healed miraculously with a fully regrown piece of cartilage within a couple of weeks. And we got Miracle Ear Kamala, who had the earrings in at the debate, who was, suddenly capable of delivering a complete sentence for the first time in her entire political career. It's a fascinating thing to behold. But yeah, I don't believe for a moment that the kid Crooks took a shot at anybody. I don't believe for a moment that Donald Trump was miraculously only grazed by a 223 round that somehow didn't manage to blow out his eardrums or cause any other damage other than a couple of centimeter nick on his ear. That's not how guns work. It's not how bullets work. That's not what freaking, speed and sound does to people, especially in your eardrums. No damage whatsoever to his hearing. None of it. When none of it makes sense, then you have to just discount the prevailing narrative and the prevailing counter narrative. The prevailing narrative, of course, is that the hand of Jesus reached down at the right moment and tilted Trump's head to avoid him being assassinated. The counter narrative is that Donald Trump orchestrated the whole thing in order to garner sympathy and get himself into the White House again. I don't think that either of those are the answer to it. I don't claim to have all the answers, but if I had to guess, my supposition is that he was hit at much closer range with a plastic projectile that was only and always going to graze him, so that no matter what happened, he miraculously survived an assassination attempt. I think they need, and I'm, my position on this is evolving a little bit, but I do think that they need Trump and Vance because that is the PayPal mafia. And that is the infrastructure for the digital prison. I don't think you get that with the same amount of cooperation that you would under a Harris administration. I think that Donald Trump, as good or better than Barack Obama, puts his base to sleep. Barack Obama ended the anti-war left. For years, on the sole basis of getting elected, in the exact same way that Donald Trump ended legitimate resistance from the right on the sole basis of getting elected. And if you need any proof of that, look at COVID. Look at the mandates, look at the lockdowns, and look at the way that all of the people went, okay, but Q's going to say that we got something coming in a couple of months. We're just going to sit here and wait, man, and it's going to be all right. You just trust the plan. You sit back, you ride that out, you trust that plan, boy, it's going to happen. I guarantee you. He's a white hat.
Oh boy, the Q. I feel like we're going to have a resurgence of the Q.
We're getting it.
People. Do you have any thought? This word, this civil war thing is thrown out there, but I often feel like this is the modus operandi of the deep state, and they can use it in many ways to their advantage. So I could even see them, whatever happens in the coming months. I feel like this talk of civil war is mostly from the mainstream media, from the system itself, and it's just like, and I feel like among the populace, there's not many takers. I mean, almost in foreign policy, that's kind of like what we see, where we see the Western half of the empire trying to entice Russia and Iran to throw the first, baiting them, and they're not falling for the bait. And I feel like that's with the Americans. I don't feel like we have an organic powder keg for a civil war, but the system keeps pushing it. And any thought on that?
Yeah, I don't think we have the national will for a civil war whatsoever. And I do a fair amount of traveling, and I talk to everybody everywhere I go. And if I see an opportunity to, I'll try to steer it towards something along the lines of what we talk about. And just to kind of gauge opinions, nobody wants to go to what, okay, I'm not going to say nobody, but very few people are actually trying to manifest a Civil War 2.0. What I have discovered is that there are a lot of individuals that are preparing to be warlords, and that's what they're gearing up for, is trying to maintain certain little patches of territory for them and their family. And they're much more concerned about that than they are putting on a uniform for red team or blue team and going to fight their neighbor in the street. There's no will for it. It's completely manufactured by the mainstream media and the mainstream alternative media. And it's a clickbait, revenue generating kind of nonsense theory that, again, I don't see the will for it. I'm sure it was different 30 years ago, 35 years ago. You could have got people at one point to go do like a race war thing. They'd push the gang stuff so hard in the 80s and the early 90s that you probably could have got some people to pop off in that respect. But you going to tell me that a bunch of blue-haired trans furries are really going to be the 158th Battalion to go up against Team Redneckistan? It's not going to happen.
I'm just wondering if somehow the deep state can get the show on the road, but I don't know. I don't see it.
I don't see it.
Is there anything, we've covered a lot. Is there anything that that we haven't touched on, something that you're interested in, concerned with?
There's something that I'd like to come back to briefly, and then we can get out of here. But you said something about how we're creating our own culture, and that is paramount. We have to create our own culture. We have to put exactly everything that we stand for, believe in, and want to see in the world out there as much as possible. That's part of what I think the Independent Media Alliance is going to be capable of delivering, is, that kind of culture. You mentioned 5 times August. I threw something that we called the Third Eye Carnival in Pueblo, Colorado, at the Blowback Art Gallery, which is like an 8,000 square foot warehouse of awesome. And we gave we gave a ton of people 12 bands and 6, panels, and we gave it to them for like 35 bucks for the whole, per person for the weekend. This is something that we're going to be doing all over the country now. I would like to take it international if we get the opportunity to do it. But if we don't have a focus on living the life we want to live in spite of the state, and then taking that to other people and other places, giving them permission to do it, because I think the, normies or MP, whatever you want to call them, just regular people who are caught up in all of this nonsense, they need permission to think independently. They need permission to go ahead and put the pieces of the pattern together. And I want to very, very desperately help them get that permission. So part of that is creating the culture. What we do on AM Wakeup, like the chat is the show for half of the people that watch, and it's blood sport in there. But there's link after link after link of vital information. There's people that make connections in real life every day. We have engagements now that have come out of the chat. We have an engaged couple now. So it's, I've always had the theory that on a long enough timeline, any internet chat forum becomes a dating app. But it's that the culture is being created, and it's a culture of independence, but also a community-minded spirit that understands that if we don't do this, at least us next to each other, if not with each other, then we're never going to be able to do it at all. And so I really do believe that if we're not focused on creating the kind of culture that we want to live in, we're going to be subjected to the kind of culture that's been created to imprison us.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of great advice. And, I think we inspire each other. This morning I was telling my wife, like, I was getting bittersweet hearing about TNT Radio dying, because it was such a blessing to be part of it. Last year I went on a whirlwind tour of the US to so many events, and thanks to the salary I had from TNT, I went out, I met so many of my, like, William Ramsey, Michael Parker. I was out in LA. I'm getting to meet Joe Allen, like all these different people, going out to the American Liberty Awards, meeting Charlie for the first time, Ron Paul conferences, all this stuff. And this year I decided I was I don't want to go anywhere. I mean, for financial reasons, but also just tired of traveling. And now I'm starting to get that what do you call it, that bug again, that I want to get out again. And you've got the Greater Reset conference in a few months, and they got a few new faces. Like I'm a big fan of the Mexican journalist Ruben Luengas, but also Ryan Christian, I think, will be out, so I'll get to meet him, I think, for the first time in the flesh, and Aaron Day. And so and I'm thinking of doing my own conference as well, finally, because when I started the podcast, like in 2015, when one of my ideas was to eventually have a conference, and in 2016 it was, I organized a one-day conference for Daniel Estulin here in Guadalajara. I spent the day with Estulin.
I want to talk to that guy so bad.
I mean, it was fascinating. I picked him up at the airport. I flew him in. I paid for his ticket. I picked him up, and then in the morning I took him to the university where he gave a talk. And then my students, university students, mostly organized the evening public event here in downtown Guadalajara. And so, just seeing what everyone else is doing, we give each other ideas. When you said your third eye thing, you should do it in Puebla, Mexico.
I want to. Look, dude, I hate conferences. That's not my scene. My scene is, music and art and jokes, and then let's go bullshit for a little bit and talk some real shit for a while in front of people. And so all the Third Eye Carnival is an art form plus real conversations, and that's a Third Eye Carnival. That's it. We had 12 bands at this one. The next one we do is going to be a comedy carnival. We're going to do one around cooking and stuff like that. Any medium of art plus real conversation is the whole thing. It's scalable, it's replicatable, you can do them anywhere. It just takes a handful of people in a friendly venue and you've got one. So yeah, dude, let's do that, because I'm for it. I am.
It just makes me think again. Was it last year with my former TNT colleagues, Hesher? We were talking for hours, like to 3 or 4 in the morning, just shooting the breeze. And when I was in Acapulco earlier this year, hanging out with Patrick Henningsen and so many other folks, and we're just chatting our years. I was shocked to hear Patrick Henningsen almost died. Just this morning, I saw he had some life and death surgery, and it's just all the news is shocking. TNT is going down. Patrick Henningsen almost passes away from, I don't know what his health issue was, but crazy times we're living in. Steve, any final thought? And then again, let us know. All your links are in the description, but you can let us know all of your projects that you have.
Yeah, so I host AM Wakeup Monday through Thursday. That's and a bunch of different platforms that's on. AMWakeupShow.com is where you can find absolutely everything. I'm also hosting a number of really cool shows on those channels. Please feel free to check those out. I have a show called Slow News Day that I've been doing for 6 years now, and that's every Sunday. That has its own channel on Rockfin. Everything else runs through AM Wakeup channels. And then I do a show called Blunt Force Wisdom, which is a complete departure from absolutely everything that we talk about. It's me and a couple of my friends from Vegas, and it's, culture and cannabis culture, and we get half wrecked and just, talk nonsense for a while. It's a lot of fun. I also became a part of a debate network called the Deliberating Dog-Faced Dudes. I just had my first debate on Tuesday this week. The question was whether or not the parents of school shooters should be charged. Very interesting conversation. I learned a lot from it. And that's going to happen every Tuesday. I am going to be streaming that out, simulcasting on the Slow News Day Rockfin, along with the AM Wakeup Odyssey channel. So AMWakeupShow.com for everything. We do have the coolest merch in the business. Thanks to Ryan Graham and Big Frog Clothing. Ryan Graham also does the Independent Review, which premieres every Friday morning at the regular AM wake up time, which is 7 a.m. On the West Coast and 10 a.m. on the East Coast. And then Ryan does the wrestling stuff that Six and I do commentary for. I'm trying to, I guess, work myself to death in order to see a little bit of good out of this. I don't know. But yeah, thank you, my friend, for having me on. And yeah, I didn't realize that I hadn't done Geopolitics and Empire before. I know we'd had a lot of conversations on TNT, and you've, of course, been on the show a number of times. Please come back. I know it's early for you. I know it is, but, I appreciate the concessions you make when you come on. And we always have a good time.
Yeah, anytime. Let me know. I think I'll be seeing you soon with our first IND Media Alliance roundtable stream, whatever. I'm a night owl, so I stay up late and get up late. But that's the cool thing about at least working for yourself. And I hope Ryan forgives me, because I've been dragging on the whole merch stuff. And I literally need to take like an entire day off, no podcasting, nothing, paid subscription stuff on Substack. I need to work on some of the designs to give to Ryan, so we can finally have the Geopolitics and Empire merch store. But keep up the great work, Steve.
Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you. I really do. You're one of my favorite people, and I'm glad that you're the current and reigning Independent Review Alliance champion.
Well, we'll see. Hopefully I can win this next round as well. So I guess time will tell.